Welcome to InPsightRadio. I am your host, Danielle Egnew, and you are a fly on the wall to everywhere. Thank you for joining me in this super spooky October editions of InPsightRadio. You know, I love this time of year. It's the time of year when I get to talk about all things ghosty and spooky and weird. I absolutely love it. And I'm going to get into this more, but we really do have a reason in October that things go bump in the night. We have all sorts of ether changes, and our ethers are thinner this time of year. So I get really excited about this because, I don't really want to labor on the paranormal just from the standpoint that I think it can get overdone sometimes. Although I love talking about it in October. It's like I love apples this time of year. I don't normally eat apples. I eat apples by the truckload as soon as fall comes in. It's such a weird thing. So, of course, I am being joined by my guest host for the October Spooky Series. You will know her as healer and herbalist Melissa Scianna. She's been on the show many times. You'll also know her as my sister-in-law. We're besties. But that's not why she's on the show. She's on the show because she is very knowledgeable in the areas of spirit life. And of course, being an herbalist, she deals with all sorts of fascinating things herbally in terms of coalescing that energy of plants, plant magic, whatever you want to call it, in helping people heal. So she does a lot in the angelic realm and in the, I think you do, in the angelic realm and in the realm of healing and spirit world and ghosts and everything on the East Coast. And so we're picking up Melissa here for this podcast on interdimensional beings. How are you, Melissa?
I am great. Thank you. I'm super happy to be here.
This is going to be so much fun.
Especially in October. I love October.
I know, right?
Yeah.
You're like a total fall person.
Yeah.
You love fall. So what I would tell everybody is today's podcast is about interdimensional beings. And the reason we're doing a podcast on interdimensional beings is because last week's podcast was about Middle Earth and what dwelled there. And one of the topics that I pulled out there was a lot of extraterrestrials living in caverns and coming through the vortexes in the earth that are created by large crystalline caverns. But a lot of times, what we have down there are the comings and goings of elemental beings, but also intradimensional and interdimensional beings. So today's podcast is all about what is an interdimensional being and how do we identify them. And Melissa, you're going to come into play heavy duty here, girl, because you, of course, are from New England.
Yes.
You are from Connecticut.
Yes.
And Point Pleasant, New Jersey is going to come into this very soon. So, Melissa, being from New England, we talk a lot about what makes something haunted. And New England, of course, has a lot of haunted vortexes. It's got haunted ground. It's got haunted granite, iron-based bedrock. It's got all kinds of haunted things in it. And during your time in New England, was there a time when you felt like you encountered something in the woods that was not a human spirit, and it wasn't a demonic spirit, and it didn't quite feel like an elemental being? Did you ever actually feel something like that out there?
I actually think that, yes, and I can't really identify it, but there's a lot of times when you're in the woods in New England hiking around and it feels like there's someone else with you or watching you or next to you in the woods. Definitely.
Okay, so now here's the cool thing about this, gang. I love talking about interdimensional beings because the intradimensional beings falls into the multiverses category. And if you're a physics nut like I am, see how excited I am in this podcast? I'm ridiculous right now. I'm a physics nut. And the multiverse theory maintains that we here in the third dimension, you're hanging out listening to this podcast, Melissa's hanging right here with me, and we are having a really fantastic discussion on a particular vibrational frequency called the third dimension. Well, then if you speed that up, you get into the fourth dimension. If you speed that dimension up, you get into the fifth dimension. If you slow it down, you get into the second dimension, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. Now, this is a very rudimentary way to put this, but we only have an hour, give or take some change. So there are beings out there that slip through the electromagnetic tears in our ether system. And they aren't necessarily aliens. They're not ghosts. They're not elemental beings. Elemental beings will go in and out of vortex tears, right, Melissa?
Yeah.
I mean, they do that a lot. And one thing, though, that I'm setting up for our discussion here is what the difference is between an interdimensional being and an elemental and a ghost and an alien. You know, an ET, an off-worlder, will travel all this way and they'll fold space and time, and they may come through a vortex that is particularly open. Yet they originate from a physical other planet that's also in our third dimensional vibration. Okay? So they're not interdimensional, even though they are traveling through dimensionally through space-time. But they are not an interdimensional being. You can look at elementals, and some elementals do cross over into the interdimensional realm. Yet elementals are actually beings that are assigned to the third dimension as middle management for Earth to take care of Earth energies. And Melissa, I've had you on the show before, and we've talked about the little people of the Prior Mountains.
Yes.
Okay, and have you been bugged by the little people lately at your house?
They don't bug me, but we were out in the hills just yesterday gathering some pigments to make paint with.
That's so cool.
I know. My new passion. And we were pretty careful. We were picking up some beautiful crystals too. The Priors are just amazing. And we were very careful to leave gifts.
Yeah.
Because we took some things and we left gifts for the little people.
So the little people then, in this case, we're talking physical beings. We're not talking they can be invisible. They can move quickly. They can move through the space-time tears of our environment, but they are third dimensional beings that can move through vortexes. Okay. Some extra dimensional beings or interdimensional beings do work in an elemental realm, but overall elementals are a third dimensional being. Okay. Even though they can step out of space-time and kind of hide from us because we kind of suck. And then, of course, ghosts. Ghosts are disembodied people. And one could say that spirit life works on a different dimension. They certainly work on a different frequency. Yet, categorically, a human spirit originates out of the third dimension and then goes to the fifth or seventh or wherever it goes once it releases out of the body. Yet, it still originates in the third dimension. So, therefore, it's not categorized as an interdimensional being. An interdimensional being. Are you ready for this? Melissa's just looking at me like, what are you talking about? I know you've encountered them. I know you have.
I know, but I still am learning.
Okay, because I know you've encountered
This is going to be a discussion.
Okay.
I can feel it.
Yes. So it's like interdimensional beings originate on, if you can imagine, the TV show Flash. And they talk about Earth 100 and Earth 9 and Earth 90 and Earth 95. And these are all multiverses of Earth. So we're like Earth 1. And then there's like an Earth 2 where maybe, Hillary Clinton is president. And an Earth 3 where Donald Duck is president. And an Earth 4 where we don't have a president, we have a king. And an Earth 5 where there is no Earth because it got blown up. And an Earth 6, you're getting the idea.
Yeah.
So interdimensional beings live, dwell, and actually have a life in another multiverse. And they zip through to ours to do weird stuff once in a while. And their vibration is not the same as a ghost. It's not the same as a person. It is almost a non-identifiable vibration. It feels really weird and eerie. It feels a lot like electromagnetic vortex energy. So, Melissa, I'm defining this because where you're from at Connecticut, where you're from in New England, those woods that you talked about, that you walk around in and get looked at, whatever, are ripe with vortex points because of the incredible nature of the electromagnetic activity and the granite-based, iron-based bedrock beneath it. So that's also where the Jersey Devil lives. Mm-hmm. And people say that the Jersey Devil, when they've seen it, has an elongated face like a horse. They say it has bat wings, whatnot. Did you ever encounter something that didn't feel like a human spirit? Well, let me ask you before we start breaking this down for people. What does a human spirit feel like to you?
Oh, a human spirit. I mean, it honestly feels human. It feels that they're not very scary. You know, it just feels like another person to me. So there's good ones, like there's good people, and there's mean ones, bad ones, like there's mean, bad people, but it doesn't feel unidentifiable. You know, it's just a person.
And have you ever felt an ET or an off-worlder that originated from another planet and then pops up here on the Earth? Have you ever felt that feeling?
Oh, I suppose so.
And now what would you categorize that to feel like?
I don't think I feel that nearly as much as some of you guys do. But the few times, it feels unknown, but again, not scary for me. You know, it's definitely for me, an ET is not something that's familiar, because I don't feel like that's like part of that's not a huge part of my genetic makeup or past lives. But I think that I've probably had them come into my life, you know, and they feel unusual, but again, they're not scary.
They're not scary. And how would heavy, dark, demonic presences, which of course, demons are real, they're a thing. We don't talk a lot about them on the show, but it is October, so we get to talk about that. October 2019, here we go. How does a heavy demonic presence feel to you in comparison to a human spirit?
I honestly don't know how many heavy demonic presences I've actually felt. I think the few times that I may have been in their presence, what I felt was more my angels telling me to go do something else and stay away from that.
Go get a malt, sister.
Yeah. I honestly don't think I've had like a lot of close contact with demonic spirits.
Okay, well, good for you. It's certainly not my favorite thing. So, but when you felt it, you felt something that came in and interrupted perhaps even the meeting with that being, like an angelic being saying, okay, you should probably leave.
Yeah, simple as that. Like it actually was like a shutdown the few times that it happened. It was like, okay, you are not doing this right now. You know,
you should go shopping.
Leave now.
There's a sale at Ross.
Yeah.
Go, run. And so yeah, that's hilarious. So, okay. So the reason I'm setting all of this up is because in the woods of New England, all the way running in this particular linear piece of land, and actually it goes, because New Jersey, you know, is not, I mean, New Jersey is, if you keep going from New Jersey over to, you know, New England, and you keep traveling over there, New Jersey is where a couple of really big, huge interdimensional being sightings have been made very, very famous. And of course, everybody knows about Mothman. Mothman. So in New England, where you're from, love, what is the lore in New England? Because New England is renowned for its ghosts. It's renowned for its hauntings. Ghosts are part of the way of life over there. Do they talk much about Mothman over there?
You know, not really. No, we're busy talking about our ghosts.
Yeah, it's your speciality.
I mean, this is so interesting because ghosts in New England are such a part of our culture, but and so I am just learning about the definition of interdimensional beings. Of course, I know about Mothman. Of course, I know about the Jersey Devil. And now that I'm starting to think about it, I suspect there's areas in the forests of New England that have that sort of activity too.
Well, and the forests feel weird. They can feel weird in New England.
Yeah.
They can feel different.
Yes.
And obviously you've got old trees, you've got vortexes, you've got stone walls that may have been built by native peoples along ley lines. However, there is a feeling out there that I encountered when I went to Salem, Massachusetts, that was unlike any other part of the country I've ever felt. And I could feel space-time rips everywhere. I kept expecting to walk out and see some like intradimensional replay of a pilgrim village or something.
And that actually happens.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about that. Like when people see stuff like that and you've seen stuff like that before as well.
I have. And one of the things that I wanted to say was that like I was saying before, we embrace our ghosts so much that I think that as New Englanders, we chalk up about every weird activity that happens as a ghost activity because
it probably is.
Ghosts are our culture.
Right.
But there's probably, we have the Mothman story and we have the Jersey Devil story. And stuff like that probably happens in New England all the time or, regularly too, but we're calling it a ghost because that's what we like to do.
Right. Okay. And see, that's kind of what I was hoping you'd talk about.
Yeah.
Because we tend to lump interdimensionals into ghost or demon. Mm-hmm. That's where we put them. And so for folks who don't know what Mothman is, Mothman, it's a being that was seen in Point Pleasant, New Jersey, and it kind of popped up from around November 12th, 1966 to about December 15th of 1967. So now this is another pin in the map of identifying an interdimensional or intradimensional, okay, is that they come for a specific period of time, but then they're not seen again for a long time after that. And the reason being is that interdimensional beings cross into our vibration or our frequency or our dimension. There has to be a doorway that is allowable for that being to come through. From we'll just say Mothman lives on, Earth 90 or whatever and came through. And so what we're dealing with there is that in that time frame, that between November 12th, 1966 to December 15th, 1967, there was an optimized rip or weak spot. And you'll notice that it was November 12th. Okay. So as far as I know, that's still, has winter even started yet in November 12th? That's still fall, isn't it?
Yes.
It's still fall.
Yep.
So, and we're in fall right now. We're in autumn. We're in this time frame where the ethers are thin. And, we were talking, we have lots of personal discussions about how you love fall and it's time to drink apple cider and all these things. So this being came through, Mothman, came through the ethers when the ethers were the most thin. And, you do a lot of plant medicines. Mm-hmm. And what can you tell us about this time of year that contributes to, leaves falling off trees, plants changing? What is it in this type of point in the year that really affects plants so dramatically? Because we're in September. It's blazingly hot if you're in the sun in Montana, but the leaves are still turning.
It's light. It's the changing of the light. It's the shortening of the days and the lengthening of the dark times. Yeah.
And that affects plants?
Absolutely.
Also?
Yeah. It does. Yeah.
So when you're harvesting plants for plant medicine, are there certain plants you just don't deal with in fall time because of these changes in the plants?
So there's definitely more optimal times to harvest different things. And just as a broad example, this is the time of the year, and it's because of it's also because of colder night temperatures. But when all the wonderful things that are in a plant and in a plant's leaves travel down the stem and into the roots. So this would be the time that you would harvest root things like yellow dock. And it's probably not the greatest time to harvest anything leafy unless it's an evergreen thing, because the leaves are starting to let go of all their nutrients and all their beautiful things and transfer them down to the roots for the winter.
Okay, so it's a root time. Now, the reason I'm talking about this, because you're looking at this, we're looking at losing light, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, as it comes in the northern hemisphere, time to be fall, it's trying to be summer down in the southern hemisphere. So in the middle of our snow, I will be talking to magnificent clients I have in Australia, and it'll be 40 below in Montana, and they are baking at 112 degrees outside of Sydney down there. It is such a weird thing to live on the opposite side of the planet from somebody. So the reason we're talking about seasons, because this has to do with interdimensionals a lot. And fall is the time frame when, we're swinging away from, the northern hemisphere is swinging away from the sun, and that creates a different pull or magnetic pull on our ionosphere. And the ionosphere is, of course, the net that goes around the Earth, and it's in great big diamonds, give or take some shaping here, but we estimate that I want you to think of like a diamond shape net all the way in the very top upper atmospheres of the Earth. And in that ionosphere is full of electromagnetic plasma and electrolyzed plasma that just crackles up there. And so as the Earth swings around in our northern hemisphere, it starts to get darker, and we aren't tipped. We switch places with the southern hemisphere as far as who's going to be closest to the sun. Then it pulls that ionosphere in such a way that it actually opens up wormholes and space-time rips differently in the northern hemisphere. So I'm sure that the southern hemisphere, I'm sure my friends in Australia could tell scans of stories about interdimensionals visiting them, like with the Aboriginal culture, yet they're going to be, it's going to be whatever their fall time is. It's the change of season that creates literally a thinness in the ether system. And that's when we see more elemental beings as well as intradimensional beings because of the thinness in the atmosphere. Is that making sense?
It does make sense, yes.
Okay, so back to Mothman. So you're noticing that Mothman pops its head through on November 12th in 1966. Mothman was a creature that was purported to have huge wings, bat-like wings, with massive red eyes in its chest, or glowing something in its chest. Like it didn't even really have much of a head. Its chest was its head, and these claws and this whole thing, and two different couples saw Mothman, and it swooped down on him, and it was really scary. Well, in that time frame, we were talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was earlier in history, yet at that point in 1966, we were still stacking up nuclear arsenals. In Point Pleasant, New Jersey, there was an old 1940s ammunition bunker that had been full of old retired ammo. And that's where people were seeing this Mothman pop through, was in this area where there was all this weird, like, icky, shoot you, kill you thing.
Was there something about Mothman that was interpreted as a warning?
Yes. And it's interesting because there was a book written just about this whole entire experience. The Mothman prophecies, where the Mothman were seen right before some pretty major disasters happened.
Yeah.
And so these beings that are interdimensional, oftentimes they are in a different space-time than we are. Yet again, they may be seeing our future and our past, and they want to help maybe. Mm-hmm. Or they pop through and they're like, listen, we have to do something to try to help these people. So what's fascinating about that is that the Mothman came about right during the time of the December 15th, 1967 collapse of the Silver Bridge and the death of 46 people. And really, if you'll notice, okay, so there's Mothman, and they said, he was flapping around and flying around and doing his thing. And really, December 15th was when the last sighting of Mothman happened, and that's when the bridge collapsed. Mm-hmm. And so if you watch the movie The Mothman Prophecies with Richard Gere, you see this guy getting all these weird messages from the Mothman. And what's fascinating about that is that many people believe that these beings are coming here to try to get our attention or to help us or to do something to assist us. Mm-hmm. And I when I key into the Mothman energy, I key into these things that they aren't from here. They're not from an extra-dimensional planet. They're from an interdimensional planet. They're from a different dimension. And they are aware of space-time in a different way than we are. And it's really interesting because according to a Russian newspaper, okay, we're talking Mothman interdimensionals, ufologists claim that Mothman sightings in Moscow actually foreshadowed the 1999 Russian apartment bombings because they were seeing the Mothman over there, and then all these bad things happened. So I don't think that the interdimensionals usher in the bad things. In the case of Mothman, I think Mothman's trying to get our attention, so that these bad things won't happen. But look at that time frame, 1999 and 1967. That's a lot of years. So that to me is very indicative of planetary alignments around Earth, something that would pull that ionosphere open in a certain way. And every so many years, that same environment, turns around and presents itself.
So it's not like there was a Mothman flying around for 20 years. He went back to where he came from and then came back here later.
Absolutely. Yes. And, and what's so interesting is that it's a phenomenon in interdimensional beings. It's like an airport. You can't land in certain airports in Alaska until the ice actually freezes over the water to create the runway.
Yeah.
So you're waiting for the perfect example of open vortex portals.
Well, that's interesting, though. If they are, in fact, coming to warn us of impending disasters like the bridge and the apartments, that's the time that vortex is opening for them. Those two times coincide, the coming disaster and the opening of the vortex.
Well, and it's weird because, or maybe they can open the vortex at certain times and there's a big disaster that's going to happen. And maybe it takes them that long to recharge whatever opens those portals. Although what's been shown to me by the angelic realm is interdimensionals cross through when there's natural gateways. It's easier to cross through. And I think we as human beings have accidentally been interdimensional travelers, like the planes that disappear in the Bermuda Triangle and end up 2,000 years ago on the walls, the hieroglyph walls of boats and helicopters and everything else carved into pyramids. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I think we become accidental interdimensional or extradimensional travelers, depending on where we are in the earth, because the earth is going to fling us around and do what it's going to do. Now, tell me what you know from your perspective and what you've heard. Like you said, you've heard of the Jersey Devil. It's surprising to me that there has not been more of an uptick in Jersey Devil discussion in the New England area, because that is the hot spot for these beings.
It's so funny because New Englanders don't really consider ourselves living near New Jersey at all. So
well, exactly. But you know what?
But we do. It's not that far. Honestly, it's like an hour.
That's what I'm saying. And those same woods, love, when you look on a longitudinal level, I get culturally, you guys probably aren't, there's not a lot in common, but that same stretch of woods goes all the way across there.
It's so interesting. Whenever I think of the New Jersey Devil, I think I've just assumed it was an elemental, honestly.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, but it makes sense because the feeling that it has isn't that really natural, this earth feeling. It feels like it doesn't belong here.
Well, and that's just the thing.
It also doesn't feel like a nice thing, though.
I don't think it's necessarily a nice thing, and maybe the Mothman. I don't get that the Mothman are bad. I don't feel like they're bad.
I don't feel like they're bad either.
The Jersey Devil, though, feels a lot more wild, and it feels to me like an extra-dimensional or an interdimensional. I mean, I think that sometimes the Jersey Devil could be an elemental being, although let's talk about some Native American lore in New England. Because when the Pilgrims landed, they encountered massive native groups of people who said, don't live there, the ground is sour. Don't go there, there are demons in the woods, or there's bad things in the woods. So I think these native cultures knew that there were thin spots in the woods that these extra-dimensional or interdimensional beings would cross over and cross into. So, do you know much about the culture of the I would say the New England Native Americans and kind of what they did out there? Do you know much about what they meant by sour ground?
I honestly don't. I would assume, I'm feeling like it's really an energetic thing. And to them, maybe that equated with sort of like an earth religion thing.
Right.
That the ground just didn't feel good. And here's a question for you that I was just thinking of. So if you are walking through an area, just we'll say the woods, where there's this potential thinness.
Yeah.
And you get a weird feeling, right? There's a lot of places in New England where you go into the woods and you're like, "Ugh, this feels abnormal," right? Would you only feel that when, say, the ethers are thin, or would that be something that you would feel all the time in a certain area?
My guess is, just the limited time that I've spent in that part of the country, I believe that those are open doorways all the time. Mm-hmm. And I think that the interdimensionals come through when those are doorways that are there. Mm-hmm. And interdimensional beings come from a different realm, and they will cross over into our dimension. And I think sometimes it's purposeful, and I think sometimes it's accidental. Yeah. And I think the Jersey Devil is an interdimensional being. I think it can also be what people call the Jersey Devil, I think is two different beings. I think one of them is an interdimensional that comes in and gets sucked in and doesn't want to be here, and therefore is really scary and creepy. And I think there's another one that gets mistaken because there's two descriptions for the Jersey Devil. Mm-hmm. There's one with a long horse face that has bat wings and weird claws. And there's another one that looks more like a Mothman, but it doesn't have the weird claws. It has hoofy feet, bat wings still, and a shorter, like a wolf face. So I think there's two different beings there that come from two different places because New England is just falling apart with vortexes.
Sure.
It's just full of them.
Sure. And I suppose that even in like northern New England, away from New Jersey, where we still have all that wooded stuff, that there's things coming and going.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe just haven't made the nationwide legend like the New Jersey Devil has.
Well, that's true. And there's all kinds of triangles up there. We know about the Bermuda Triangle, and we know about different triangles off of the coast of India into the water where these weird occurrences happen and planes disappear and whatever. Those are dimensional folds. Mm-hmm. And we have documentation of Christopher Columbus going through the Bermuda Triangle, talking about not only did he see lights and craft coming up through he was seeing UFOs, craft coming up through the water and whatnot. There's this documentation that he talks about. It's misty, they're sailing through, and all of a sudden he talks about a wall of iron that just goes right in front of him that has basically candles and lights all over it. And at the same time, you can read about in World War II, an aircraft carrier that was cutting through that place that saw this funny little tiny ship with, this 3-mast ship, and they thought it was like an excursion cruise, where people dress up and take people out and whatever. And these guys, it was very authentic. They had lanterns. So you're looking through space-time in these different dimensions, and time is a dimension. Mm-hmm. Time is a dimension, So we have this opportunity to see that not only is Mothman an interdimensional being that comes through to help, Jersey Devil is, again, there's a version that's an elemental, but the one I'm talking about, I think it gets trapped here. Mm-hmm. And then once it's on this side of wherever it is, I think eventually it can go back, but it's like the horror movies where you're waiting for the, optical opening to get the being back through to the other side.
Yeah, and he's running around irritated because he can't get back to where he belongs.
Absolutely.
That's the way he feels, that particular thing, yeah.
And okay, so let's talk about your parents' house.
Okay.
Which, we're going to get to in the next podcast about how haunted that house is and all the ghosts and things that you've actually encountered there. Mm-hmm. Yet, let's talk about the woods, And I know you've told me stories about the woods being creepy or whatever. Have you ever felt, and again, here's how you can identify an interdimensional, and we'll talk about an inter and intradimensional, what the difference is. If you've ever felt like something is darting around you, that can also be an elemental being. Mm-hmm. Yet it just gives you an eerie feeling, like something is just a little bit like you just like you get slimed by it, kind of like ugh.
Yeah, actually, in the woods behind my parents' house. There's so much going on around my parents' house. That not necessarily like here I can feel elementals darting around me all the time.
Right.
But there, I don't feel them darting around so much. It's more like you're walking through the woods and you can feel something watching you. Almost like you're looking above you in the trees.
That's what I was going to ask you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and I didn't want to seem like I was planting that in your brain.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of times the interdimensional rips are not always ground-based. They're in the atmosphere. So, and I was wondering if you ever look up.
And in the forest, there's always a forest canopy in New England. So there's always trees over your head. It's not like here where you can see the sky. You don't really see the sky very often unless you're, in a meadow or something. And yeah, so that's what those weird, eerie places feel like. It makes a person that normally doesn't look up want to see what's up there.
Because you feel the disturbance in the upper atmosphere.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, you guys. I'm talking about the ionosphere and how it pulls on the earth and how it opens these dimensional portals. Of course, the earth is part of that because the earth is the giant spinning electromagnet. Yet the space-time rip doesn't often actually originate in the earth. Now, it can originate way in the earth if you've got those big crystal caverns that will hold a space for that kind of space-time disruption, and they will. Yet above ground, and it's not to say that a space-time disruption doesn't happen on the surface of the earth, because that's like, you never say never with this stuff. Yet most of the time, it's in the upper atmosphere. And so I think it's super interesting that you want to look up. Because a lot of these interdimensional beings that do get stuck on this side, they get sucked through, just like we'd get sucked through the Bermuda Triangle, and God knows where we end up. Now they're mad, they're crispy. They're not always vibrating in the same resonation that we are. So it makes them appear invisible. They might be slightly faster than our dimension. And again, Jersey Devil, as described with the long horse face or whatever, that's from another space-time, completely. And the Native Americans used to tell stories about that. And people have documented these beings coming out of the trees. They come out of nowhere, and you hear this massive swooping. They'll pick up a dog and eat it. I mean, they're big. They're physical beings that are big. And some of them are moving faster than our space-time. Some aren't. So it's a pretty amazing thing. And they're not like demons. They don't originate here.
So they are sort of like flesh and blood creatures.
Yeah.
Not like demons.
No.
Yeah.
No, demons are a whole different thing. No, these guys are flesh and blood creatures, yet their particle matter sometimes may be moving so quickly, or they may have the opportunity to move it faster than our dimension, which will make them appear invisible.
Yeah.
Another very famous interdimensional being are shadow people. Have you heard of shadow people?
Yes.
Okay, what do you know about shadow people, girlfriend?
I don't know a lot about shadow people.
Oh, come on. You live in Connecticut. That's like the hub of weird shadow people activity up there. But you guys probably thought they were ghosts.
We probably did, because ghosts are cool and we call everything a ghost. Yeah.
All right, shadow people. And I bet you've seen these things up there. They look like a shadow. They move very quickly. A dark shadow, you guys. They don't look like a light shadow, not like a white shadow or a gray shadow. That can actually be a human spirit moving. These things are a dark shadow. And the dark shadow is pretty scary. And a lot of times, people who encounter shadow people aren't nice. And a lot of times they will encounter people and try to tell them to do harmful things to themselves. And there is a psychic on a TV show right now. And, she's an interesting kind of out there character. And she talked about encountering one of these shadow people. Her name is Amy Allen, and she's on Dead Files. And Amy has talked about encountering shadow people and how they were telling her to bite down on a plugged in electrical cord, just to see what happens. And people call them demons or whatever, but these are not demonic beings. They're from a different dimension. I've encountered them. Weird stuff stays away from me. I mostly stay away from it, but they resonate. They look like a shadow, and sometimes they will have a hat on. People report this shadow wearing a hat. Have you ever seen that, Melissa?
No, but I've heard of it.
Okay.
I know of which you were speaking. So would you say that, this just brings up a random question, that sometimes could it be possible that people who are indeed doing harmful things to themselves or maybe under the influence of a shadow person?
Yeah, you absolutely could be. Or like if you're a little kid and you think it's your friend, when Amy Ellen recounted this story on television, I don't know her personally. This was a story she told on TV. When she recounted this story on TV, she talked about the fact that she was little and these beings came to her and she thought they were her friend. And they would tell her to do harmful things. A lot of people who suffer from schizophrenic disorders and schizophrenic subsets will talk about these beings that come into their room that are these shadow beings that tell them to do harmful things, which is why they get confused by the paranormal community as ghosts or demons. They're not ghosts. These beings are moving so quickly. And they generally are only found in really high electromagnetic index places where vortexes exist, not only all over on the ground, but in the upper atmosphere, which is New England.
Is there one that's particularly well known that does have like a bowler hat?
Are you thinking of Bowler Hat Man?
Yeah, is he a shadow person?
Bowler Hat Man his character was made off of shadow person lore. And it was because they would see this hat on this shadow. And it's, again, they're real skinny. The shadows are skinny. They don't look like a regular shadow. It's kind of weird.
So these beings are not flesh and blood.
These beings, I believe, probably are, except they continue to move at such an accelerated rate that to us, they look see-through. That's the ghost. That's a ghost. The minute we let go of our body, Melissa, our spirit is moving so quickly that, it's really vibrating quickly. And so that quick vibration is going to give way to appearing invisible or see-through or whatever, because we're not quite in the same resonation or frequency as the third dimension. So my guess would be that a lot of what the Native Americans were talking about in your neck of the woods back in Connecticut was interdimensional beings when they talked about don't go there, the ground is sour. Mm-hmm. Because outside of Mothman, Jersey Devil would just get nasty with people.
Yeah.
It would get nasty. It eats dogs. It attacks people.
Oh, yeah. He's got big teeth and yeah.
He's icky.
Yeah.
He's not your friend. He's weird. Stay away from Journey Devil.
Not good.
No, not to be prejudiced, but wow.
Okay, one more question about the this. You said that this psychic had this like an invisible friend as a child that told her to bite on this cord, and it was a shadow person. Lots of children have invisible friends, right?
Oh,
I had an invisible friend as a child. Her name was Susan.
Her name was Susan? Did she look like a shadow with a hat on?
I don't remember.
God, I hope not. What the hell?
But I wonder how many kids' invisible friends are actually shadow people.
Well, it's probably a lot of them. And usually the shadow people, you can see them. And the psychic recounted the story that her mother said that it was an invisible friend. And she kept saying, no, I could see it. It was a shadow. But now we know them as shadow people. And I keep having this weird thought that it's us in a future universe coming back like a game show to see if we can make us do stupid things, like Jackass in the future. And so they cross through these portals, and there's actually well-known in the New England woods, there are well-known stone structures that the Native Americans claimed that the shadow spirits came in and out of. And that's where they were trying to keep the pilgrims out of.
They're actually finding more and more stone structures in New England that they originally thought were built by the colonists, that they're finding actually have been there way longer than that, and they were built by Native Americans, and some of them do look like entryways, or they might be like a little hut built out of stone or something like that. So there's probably more stone portal places like that in New England than we actually realize.
Oh, I know there are, because New England is uniquely set up because of its geomagnetic parameters to absolutely be a place that is a hot interdimensional and intradimensional magnet. And of course, it's fall. It's a wonderful time to be, doing our thing. And the ethers are thin, and the story of Ichabod Crane, the story of the headless horseman And I can't, oh man, I'm blanking out. Do you remember the story where the town that the Headless Horseman took place in? It was someplace in New England.
I want to say it was like Massachusetts. It was definitely New England, and it was either Connecticut, Massachusetts, or Rhode Island.
Yeah,
I can't remember the name of the town.
And it was The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Washington Irving wrote this story, and it's interesting because the Headless Horseman is this ghost who throws a pumpkin head, at Ichabod Crane, and it's fascinating because the way that the Headless Horseman emerges, actually in the story, he's supposed to be a ghost, I think. But in the story, it's more like an interdimensional. Like this thing just appears this one time out of the year on this bridge, and it's in a specific spot.
And he was almost teaching a lesson. I don't know that it was supposed to be a ghost.
Yeah.
It
could have been a demon, that Washington Irving was writing about. But the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the description of that being coming out of nowhere, only one time a year, doing one specific thing, that is such an interdimensional, description. And what I think is interesting about that is that when we look at the way the Earth is set up, the difference between interdimensionals and intradimensionals and interdimensionals, we can actually have beings come here from different worlds that we would look at, and they have alien technology. They look like an ET. We identify them as an ET, okay? But that is an extra dimensional that's coming as, we would identify them as an ET. But basically an extra dimensional is an ET from a different dimension. Okay, so there's still an interdimensional would be something that is coming here that either shares the same exact Earth space as we do. It's just from a multiverse of Earth. I know, right? Is your brain blowing up?
No, it just made me think about, okay, so what if there are ETs on Earth in a different time or a different dimension, and then they come through, so they're actually
interdimensional.
Interdimensional.
They would be. In that case, if they're originally,
the lines are so crossed.
Oh, I know, right? And you might be able to be both. Yeah. But a lot of the extra dimensionals that we refer to anymore, people like to call Pleiadians extraterrestrials. Some beings from the Pleiades are ETs or off-worlders. Most of the Pleiadians are no longer corporeal beings. Some still are. There are many, many worlds in the Pleiades, or the Seven Sisters out there. So we're not talking about just one alien race. There's many, many out there. So some of them are corporeal or physical, and some of them have transcended being corporeal or physical. Now, when they visit us, they become, at that point, because they're now in a different dimensional space-time, they become an extra dimensional in this particular place, but we call them ETs anyway. As opposed to the Pleiadians, who more like the Oturan or any of those folks who colonized way out there past the belt of Orion from our perspective from Earth, that would be more, if that is an ET or an off-worlder, okay? Now these beings that come from, to describe an interdimensional place, I want you to think of the movie Jacob's Ladder. Did you see Jacob's Ladder? Mm-hmm. Super freaking goddamn throw your guts up disturbing movie, in my opinion. And it was disturbing because it was super realistic. So let's talk about dream states. And my daughter, the other day, had a really scary nightmare last week. And she had this nightmare. And again, we're in fall. So our ethers are thin. And our interdimensional beings, which are hanging just right next to us in a dimension where we normally have a nice ethereal barrier, that ether's super thin. So it's easy to come through, especially when our brain relaxes its brain waves. And we go into altered states of consciousness when we sleep. And those vibrational consciousness points can actually hop a freaking fence over into a whole nother dimension. Okay? So my kid has this dream that she's laying there and there's a mirror on her wall. And this face appears in the mirror as if suspended from the ceiling. And she can see the reflection of this face that's looking at her through the mirror. But she can't see the being whose face it would be, being created. And all of a sudden, it drops and this body appears and kind of pulls out of the mirror / appears. And it's like a male that's scuttling like a spider, like something out of, it gives me the creeps, like something out of The Ring, just scuttling down the wall and across the floor. I'm getting goosebumps even talking about it because I've actually encountered interdimensional beings that move that way. Mm-hmm. And they're creepy as flip. Mm-hmm. They're god-awful. And I think other people have encountered these beings in their dream states, and that's why they're starting to show up in our movies. But there are real beings that move like that in different dimensions where gravity is different. And so my daughter has this dream where this thing scuttles off the floor and she's on the top. She has a loft bed, and this thing scuttles over and she can't see it. And it's getting ready. And like she's trying to wake up so she can wake up out of this altered state. But of course, she has the dream in October. And she never has dreams like that. This is a kid who dreams like she pets unicorns and stuff. Her dreams are crazy happy. But we're in that thin ether time. And you had a dream you told me about not too long ago where I am positive that you encountered interdimensional beings. And tell everybody about that.
Except for that it wasn't a dream.
See, and this is, and you're like, it wasn't a dream. I'm like, okay.
Not a dream. So it was, I woke up in the night and I looked around. It was my bedroom. I'm laying in my bed, looking around my bedroom. And up in the corner, the right-hand corner of my ceiling in the two walls is a giant spider and a giant beetle.
Like, define giant. Like, how big is giant?
Like 4 feet across. Like, giant. That's up there hanging onto half the ceiling, half the walls, and so of course I assumed it was a dream. And so I told myself to go back to sleep because this is just a dream, and closed my eyes because my eyes were actually open when I saw it.
And here's the thing, but you came up out of a dream state. You were awake, your eyes were open, you were sleeping, but now you're awake. So keep going.
So I closed my eyes, waited a couple minutes, then reopened my eyes, and the darn things were still there. And that happened like 3 times before. I think at that point I fell back asleep, and I regret it because I wish that I had talked to them and asked them what they were doing on my ceiling. But,
a 5-foot spider, a 4-foot spider, I'd be like, oh, hell no.
I was a little scared and I wanted to make them go away, but yeah.
You can go back to the hell dimension you crawled out of, you effed up things.
They weren't really scuttling around though, so they weren't that scary. They were just kind of sitting there, and I was thinking, why are those giant bugs on my ceiling?
Well, now, okay, so this is what I want to explain. So the state that you talked about, you were awake, your body, your eyes were open, yet your consciousness had not fully pulled out of the dimension that you were in into this third dimension. You were awake, but your brain was still you had hopped from that dream state. And I'm not saying it was a waking dream. What I'm talking about is when we visit, what time of year was that? I'm just curious.
Oh gosh. It was a good year. Maybe it probably was about this time of year. It was a good year ago. I honestly don't remember clearly.
You don't remember if it was in the fall by chance or anything like that? Because these types of dreams that we have, when these ethers get thin, when we get into a sleep state, then we dimensionally travel all the time in our sleep. We see spirits talk to us, we go to different planes of existence, and of course our brain just matrixes crap from the day. However, what you describe is what happens when we dimension hop and you're seeing 2 things in the same space at one time. So as example, that spider and that beetle, it looks like they're kind of hanging on, your wall and your ceiling. And that dimensional reality of your house in Earth 99, maybe in Earth 99 right there, there's still prehistoric bugs. Maybe we never got hit by an asteroid. Mm-hmm. Maybe those prehistoric bugs have just gone on and on. So you actually see both dimensions, or sometimes more than one, at one time in the same place. And this is common with people who are healers. It's common with people who do any dimensional traveling or astral traveling, we like to call it. Mm-hmm. Have you had out-of-body experiences? I'm just curious. Or like where you
dream,
just
like astral projection
astral
stuff?
projection, or like some weird thing, like you swear you walk down the hall and then you wake up and you're like, wait, I'm in my bed.
Little things like that all the time. And like dreams like this bug dream. Yeah. Lots. The bugs were pretty special because they were so large.
Well, and it's just so that's a dimensional traveler issue.
But I have lots of times I'll wake up in the night and I'll be, it feels like I'll see something weird in the room and I'll have to say, are you awake? Look around the room. Is this your room? And it will be. Stuff like that happens a lot. Yeah.
Okay, so so you are a prime example of an astral traveler. Did you know that?
No, and I honestly wish I could get more control over that.
I wish you guys could see her. She has very large eyeballs right now.
Think where I could go.
Yeah, right? I'm going to Paris. I'm going shopping.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've been a really good sport, Melissa, because I've drug you down some really weird rabbit holes here. She's looking at me like, what is this? However, I knew this about you. I knew that you go into different dimensional spaces and states because Melissa is also production manager for the Road Angel TV show that we're shooting about what I do with angels. And Melissa's had to leave certain areas because the etheric barrier is so disturbed or it's heavy or it's messed up and it makes her sick. Mm-hmm. And the minute she'd be outside just trying to recover from this awful EMF index, I'm like, oh, I bet you go places in your dreams. I bet you're a dimensional traveler. You have a massive EMF sensitivity here. So, I had a dream. It wasn't even a dream. And it was in the fall. It was in October and it was years ago. It was like 12 years ago. I was in Tacoma, Washington. I was signed to a record label. I was on tour and I was in this bedroom that was attached to a garage I co-owned this record label and it was a really big bedroom and it didn't have any windows and it just had a light fixture in there. And I knew things were going to get weird because where this house is positioned is right on the edge of McCord Air Force Base. And whenever you have Air Force bases, you have a lot of augmentation in EMF. You have a lot of augmentation in geothermal electromagnetic energy. There's a lot of off-worlders coming and going in those areas, especially in the Pacific Northwest. It's insane. So I knew there was going to be some issues with sleeping in this house. And I was out in the garage. And at the same time, the first night, I would always sleep with, there was a really fancy chandelier in this beautiful bedroom that you could barely, had a dimmer.
Yeah.
Right? And it would get I could barely put it on because it was pitch blackety black in that bedroom. And if you had to get up and use the restroom, you'd kill yourself trying to find the door. So it was just this barely light. And I remember waking up. And it wasn't like a ghost woke me up. It's just I popped awake, which I just don't do if you know me. And then the room is pitch black. So something had turned the light off. And the only way to turn that light off would be to push the lever all the way down or to depress the off button on the switch. Mm-hmm. So it's like the light went off and that's what woke me up. And I'm like, great. And it took me a minute because I remember feeling lost in the room. And I remember thinking, am I actually in this bedroom? Am I sleeping? I was awake. My eyes were open. And I'm like, well, crap. Something's in my room. So I thought, well, I better get up and turn the light back on. And so I had a basic idea of where the light was from my bed. So I get up and I'm walking to this light and I can feel in the pitch black darkness this multitude of beings just like inches from my face. And I finally find the light switch and I turn it on and I'm trying to control a panic response because there's something you can feel and I couldn't feel it breathing, but I could feel it right there. And there was a whole bunch of them in this room. And I flicked the light on and actually the light had been physically turned off. So it wasn't like, the slider fell all the way down with gravity and turned the light off. The actual switch had been turned off. So I turned the switch on again and I'm sitting in there and I literally sat there for a minute and the wall looked different. The wall looked like it was covered in cells, like body cells. And I'm awake, you guys. I'm standing awake in this room and the body, it's like these body cells are covering the wall. And I'm like, what? But I can still see the wall through them. It's like there are two places occupying the same space.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, I've been traveling. I need to get my crap together. I need to pull it together here and, and figure out what's going on here. So I finally wake up all the way and go to sleep again. And the light's on, and when I wake up. Well, the next day, I fall back asleep, and there were weird things going on the Air Force Base. There were a lot of space-time augmentations. I was talking to the co-owner of the record label, Ray Hayden, and it was Maurice the Fish Records back in the day, for any of you that remembers that label. And I was talking to him about, how'd you sleep last night? And he was like, well, I was okay, but my clock kept stopping, and just weird things kept happening. In time, and he'd lose time, and he woke up way earlier than he thought he should. His body clock was saying it was a certain time, but it was way, way early. So time was all off, So I'm going to sleep, and I wake up, and again, the second night I look, and I'm waking up, and there is this window in my room. There's no windows. It's a garage, okay? Weird. And the window is casting light on this wall, which again is made of these cells. And there is this weird thing, this clawed hand that's coming up through my dresser, like it's reaching for me. And I'm looking at this just going, oh my God, come on, pull together your consciousness. Whatever dimension this is, you have to get out of this dimension. And it was literally a dimension splitting thing. And I think there was something going on at the Air Force Base.
Wow.
That was creating this, because at the same time, the night before, they were reporting weird lights in the sky and weird UFO stuff coming in and out of, the woods around there. So the reason I talk about this is interdimensional beings. We can also be an interdimensional traveler, and we can pop up like a nightmare for somebody else in their dream in a different dimension. And people will be like, what the hell's that? You should have seen this thing. It was bald and had hair only at the top of its head and whites around its eyeballs and no fingernails and funny short little teeth. And it was terrifying. We look really terrifying to a lot of things in other dimensions.
That's awful. I don't want to be somebody's nightmare.
It's a true story, though. So now with all of this description, just with the very few last minute or so that we have, is there anything you can think of in New England that would have fit more of an interdimensional experience than now I'll re-ask you the question, than a ghost, an elemental, or a demon?
I'm rethinking all my ghost experiences. Because some of the things that I have never seen like a crazy animal like the Jersey Devil or a Mothman. I sure would like to see the Mothman.
I want to see the Mothman, man. Come on.
I know. I keep asking for him.
Oh,
damn. But it does make me rethink some of my experiences with ghosts, and also with just like weird feelings in the forest. I may have told you about being in this like parking area in the forest. I was a teenager. Don't even ask what I was doing.
I don't think I need to.
And this crazy feeling of like danger. Like, and it honestly did feel, thinking back, I had like a giant panic attack. And thinking back on it, it felt like everything in that place just shifted.
Oh, and I'm wondering if you didn't get caught in an interdimensional wiggle, like Roanoke.
That's like the craziest. That's honestly one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me, was that night. And the person that I was with, I was like, we need to get out of here right now. And he was like, oh, we'll go in a minute, and I'm like, no, something horrible is going to happen to us if we don't leave this place right now. And I was 100% sure that was fact. And I was like a teenager, not that in touch with my spiritual side at the time, but I just knew that we had to leave. And so I wonder if, I chalked it up to ghosts at the time because I'm from New England and that's what we do.
Right. But it's a ghost. It's a ghost.
I really don't think that's what it was.
And you're saying you felt it just sort of like shift around you. Like that's an interesting way That's what happens in interdimensional rifts. Like Brigadoon. Brigadoon is an interdimensional rift, which is cool, right?
Yeah, that was a super cool interdimensional rift.
Absolutely. An Outlander. Outlander is an interdimensional rift, where you're back in time and it's so romantic because
it felt like. It felt almost like something horrible had happened in that exact spot. And it felt like the energy of it was there, almost like I was going to experience that horrible thing that had already happened there. Does that even make sense?
Yes, it does. And they're actually, that can be a residual haunting also. Yet when we have interdimensional replays of something, I believe that a lot of times what we think is a haunting is an interdimensional replay. And there is a wiggle in space-time, and we literally are going back to that ripped space in time where a trauma occurred, and the trauma kind of put a pin in that space-time or that section, and we can experience that. And it's interesting because just before we go here, we're talking about Bermuda Triangle, and you're talking about this area that you were at that was a physical area where everything shifted around you, and you're like, this is getting weird. I got to go. The Bridgewater Triangle is actually in that area of New England. And the Bridgewater Triangle, it's an area of, 200 square miles or so. And it's within southeastern-ish Massachusetts. And it's this triangle. And it's claimed to be a site of, lots of paranormal phenomena, UFOs or poltergeists and balls of fire, orbs, all this stuff, Bigfoot sightings. Bigfoot's an elemental that travels interdimensionally. And giant snakes, giant animals, giant bugs. Okay, this is all in the Bridgewater Triangle. And thunderbirds. And I think the thunderbirds are more like our Mothman or our Jersey Devil.
Yeah.
So these things are coming and going out of the Bridgewater Triangle. Yet it's still got that same weird electromagnetic effect. And it's up in New England.
That's super close to where I grew up.
Yeah.
It's not far. From south, or did you say southeastern Massachusetts?
Yeah, southeastern
So I grew up
Massachusetts.
in northeastern Connecticut. So it's like across the state line from us. It's super close.
Okay. And it's like this has towns in it. Like you might have heard these towns. Freetown, Abington, Brockton, Whitman, West Bridgewater, East Bridgewater, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that's very close.
Berkeley, So that these towns are in the Bridgewater Triangle phenomenon, and they see all of this stuff that happens there. And I believe strongly that that's an interdimensional portal, much like the Bermuda Triangle, where elementals and ley lines and geothermal activity, all of that crosses over and creates these hot spots, and it's really, in Vermont, there's a similar triangle called the Bennington Triangle. So, that whole area up there has these weird spaces of rips of space-time.
I'm sure there's some places in New Hampshire too. I think that I've heard of.
Well, and it's really, really interesting because, you find all kinds of weird phenomenon, like in the Bridgewater Triangle, that, again, I think is interdimensional stuff. Like, for instance, there's this thing they call the Solitude Stone, and it's basically it's an inscribed stone that's located near, apparently it's located near a popular street called Forest Street in Bridgewater. And it was found near a missing person's body, okay? And so people call it the Suicide Stone. And the rock was found with this inscription on it. And the inscription said, "All ye who in future days walk by Nunkatesset stream, love not him who hummed his lay cheerful to the parting beam, but the beauty that he wooed." And it's this bizarre, obviously that's not how we speak in this time frame.
No.
And so, there's these things that appear like the Bermuda Triangle. They just appear in the Bennington Triangle, which is actually right by your house, man.
That's so cool.
Why I didn't want to plant any of this in your head and dropped it all on you just cold.
I actually don't even know about that particular thing, but I think that's because this stuff is all around us in New England,
You guys just roll with it, man. It's cool. And as a matter of fact, we roll with it so much. Do you know, like how I said I'm not from New England, I'm from Montana. But the New Englanders roll with it so much that Melissa and I are hosting at the end of October a wonderful event in Bridger.
It's actually coming up pretty soon. So it's sort of mid-end of October.
Yeah, that's true.
So, yeah.
That's true. And so it is the Haunted Bridger Ghost Hunt. Mm-hmm. And Melissa, tell us about that.
So Bridger, Montana, small town Montana, but a place where lots of really cool things have happened throughout history, like Calamity Jane hung out there, Buffalo Bill Hickok hung out there, beat people up, shot people,
You know, it was Buffalo Bill, man.
like we do in Montana.
That's kind of the thing. Regrettably, in the Old West, it was a little scary.
So what we've done is arranged some entry into some old buildings in town. We'll be able to kind of check out the buildings, walk in their basements. Danielle will be there talking to the ghosts that are there.
That's right.
It's October 18th and 19th, and we have a ghost hunt at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. on both nights. So to get tickets...
you just head over to my website at danielleegnew-advisor.com/events. You guys, the tickets are only $25.
And they're going actually super fast.
They are really going really, really fast. So we're going to have so much fun and hot mulled wine and apple cider and meeting at Vintage Apothecary beforehand to talk about, different herbs that are helpful this time of year.
Yes, I made up a protection spray. So anyone that wants to get sprayed with the herbal protection spray can do that before we take off on our ghost hunt.
That's right. It's spiritual deodorant, people. You want to keep yourself safe. So anyway, okay, so I've got our engineer over here waving at me like wildly because we're like 10 minutes over time here. But I wanted to finish this because this is so cool. And there's a lot about interdimensionals, extradimensionals, intradimensionals. And if you get a chance, come see me and Melissa at the middle of this month.
Yes.
And we're going to go do some fun, scary things. So Melissa, thanks for being here.
Thank you. What a fun time.
This is awesome. And I wish I had a picture of your very large eyeballs.
Stop.
Through a lot of this podcast, you're like, what in the F are you talking about? This gets really good.
No, I honestly learned a lot. Like, cracked my whole concept of everything is a ghost. Yeah. So.
Well, that's kind of why I had you, because I know how you New Englanders are about your ghosts. So anyway, everybody, thanks so much, Melissa. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And I will see you next week.